The North Atlantic War by Michael Trela. Operation Cyclone. Stage 1. Landing. The sudden blares of warning sirens shattered the silence that had enveloped the Danish base at Hellesandor. Iceland had fallen hardly a week before, the capital having been thoroughly devastated by the British onslaught. In a sense, the invaders had just finished establishing themselves and settling into their new territory. The plan had been to construct airfields from which to launch bombing raids against the Republic, while an effective landing strategy could be devised. The Republic decided that they would beat them to the punch. Danish troops frantically rushed hither and thither as they manned their positions to repel the enemy attack. Anti-aircraft guns were manned, SAM sites were prepped, and rocket launchers were armed as the soldiers readied themselves for the coming assault. They weren't sure as to what the Republic was sending at them, but they knew for certain that it would be from above. They had to prepare for everything. They didn't have long to wait. As spotters and radar stations scanned the skies for incoming foes, Republic bombers zoomed into range at supersonic speeds, rapidly decelerating so as to unleash their payloads onto their targets with greater accuracy. The velocity change was so severe that on both the radar and through advanced binoculars, the sight was similar to starships coming out of hyperspace in a science fiction movie. Known as the B-01 SSB, these masterpieces of aeronautics were designed to be the terror of the skies. Cruising at altitudes of 35,000 feet and above, they traveled at Mach 3 until reaching their objective, at which point they would slow down to below Mach 1 in 3.68 seconds and begin the attack. Armed with twin 50-caliber machine guns, multiple flare ports, an automated top-mounted turret, and carrying up to 175 high-explosive warheads, they combined the supersonic technology of the 21st century with the high-altitude mass carpet bombing of the mid-20th. Once they had successfully obliterated their designated targets, or simply run out of bombs to drop, they would quickly accelerate back up to Mach 3 until clear of the engagement zone and return to whence they had been launched. They were the largest, fastest, and most accurate carpet bombers in the world. Their image would haunt the dreams of those who lived through an attack for years to come. The world seemingly erupted into utter chaos as the concussions of the impacting warheads shattered teeth, explosions deafened ears, and blasts blinded eyes. The defenders frantically worked at their defenses, firing off dozens of missiles and hundreds of AA rounds into the skies above them in response to the attack. However, the flares and rapid speed changes from the bombers negated much of this. The Danes had been prepared for many things. This wasn't one of them. Strategic combat insertions, strike bombing runs, and strafing targets with ground attack craft were the tactics of the modern warfare. Their missiles were high-speed short-range, meant for taking out jets as they dove in and picked off specific targets, and their guns were designed to blow attack choppers and slower craft out of the sky. A mass carpet bombing run from 40,000 feet up by jet bombers was old-fashioned, outdated, obsolete, unthinkable. The massive explosions, whistling of impending destruction, and thunderclaps of the sound barrier as it was shattered time and again all told them that they were very wrong. The attack lasted the greater part of 20 minutes, though to the Danish defenders it felt like an eternity. The base was in ruins. Not a single square foot of land left untouched by the bombing raid. Smoke clouded the sky around the area, and the stench of burning munitions and boiled flesh hung over the entire base. Craters littered the ground, structures leaned on their last skeleton-like supports, and wounded soldiers cried out for medical attention or death. The attack was just a preliminary to the overall plan which the Republic had devised. It wouldn't be the last time the aggressors would witness such a raid either. Word is going about that continuous bombing raids are being inflicted on Danish positions in the north. General Blake was pensively sipping his afternoon tea as the man, a major, delivered the report. He'd heard the same news already, of course. In fact, he could hear the booms and bangs of the raids from his quarters in Reykjavik. Still, carpet bombers? Supersonic carpet bombers? This was a twist indeed. He couldn't think of anyone who had been expecting such a mix between old and new styles of warfare. The enemy were certainly innovative, he granted. We've sent most of our RAF contingents to patrol and safeguard the northern parts of the island, the Major continued, which should hinder the Republic from attacking so frequently. However, considering how our enemies seem to adapt to situations, we should have a secondary plan just in case they suddenly change tactics. The general nodded and took another sip of his tea. Tell me, he asked, have all of our Royal Air Forces been sent north? Yes, sir. Then that means we've left ourselves here completely vulnerable to an air raid? The Major didn't reply right away. He glanced about nervously, ashamed that he hadn't thought of that before. Well, sir, yes. However, all enemy attacks have been concentrated at the Danish bases on the northern part of the island. We have yet to experience any assaults on British-held territory. Blake gazed at the soldier before him, his eyes giving all the accusations of rash action and lack of foresight that words were not needed for. He finally broke his stare to locate where he set down his teacup. Yet, he murmured, as he reached for the dish's handle. This is Black Leader to all units. We are approaching the targeted area. Sound off. Black 1, standing by. Black 2, standing by. Black 3, standing by. Black 4, standing by. The signals continued throughout the squad, as the force split the sound barrier while making its way toward its destination. Black 20, standing by. Black Leader nodded to his co-pilot. We're all here then? Excellent. Orange Group and Green Group have just confirmed full strength as well. Have all munitions ready for discharge. Target at 2.5 miles out. Prepare to decelerate to attack speed in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The entire building shook as the shockwave of a nearby explosion slammed into it. The teacup's handle jumped over Blake's hand and crashed to the floor, splintering shards scattering at his feet. He quickly recovered from the impact and rushed to the window. Warning klaxons began to blare across the city, intermingled with the sounds of shouting soldiers and mobilizing combat platforms. The fire and smoke from the blast were still visible as a flaming red cloud mushroomed up from the town square. The clouds were dispersing, but it sounded as though they had suddenly become embroiled in a thunderstorm. Soon enough, high-pitched whistles began to add to the cacophonous chorus, quickly succeeded by more deafening concussions and blinding explosions. Damn, but I hate it when I'm right. General Blake hurried out the office door, the Major hot on his heels. Sir, we need to get you to the shelter beneath the building, the Major shouted over the sounds of the bombing. Where do you think I'm headed? Blake snapped back, throwing the other man a look of annoyance beyond belief. The Major promptly shut up. The two continued to rush through the halls and down the stairs of the building, occasionally losing their footing or bracing themselves against a wall when a warhead detonated particularly close by. Shards of glass whipped past them like shrapnel as windows were shattered by the blasts, while paint and drywall were shaken to the floor. It was getting increasingly harder to navigate as debris continued to whirl about them. The air was becoming hotter and thicker as well. Stealing a glance through a destroyed window, General Blake saw that the entire city was ablaze. Fires rose to the sky in massive bursts, while tornadoes of flame flew about, wreaking havoc on what remained of the city structures. So they're firebombing us, are they? He thought. The two of them spun around a corner and bolted down the staircase as fast as they could, adrenaline the only thing keeping them from falling face first from exhaustion. As they descended down to the shelter, the stairs and walls quickly became made of metal, and sounds of the attack became continuously more faint. Eventually, they came across a small yet toughly reinforced door. The Major took hold of the latch and began to heave with all his might. Can't you go any faster, man? Blake shouted earnestly. Trying, sir. Apparently the shelter hasn't been used in quite some time. A tremor resounded through the metal. Air began to blow harder at them from up the stairs. Hot air. Blake turned around and gasped. A firebomb had landed atop the stairwell, and now the blast was being funneled down toward them. Move, curses! He bellowed, forcing the other man aside and gripping the latch. The heat was building. A bright yellow glow began to illuminate them. On three! 1, 2, 3! The two soldiers gave it one last heave. There was an ear-splitting shriek as the dormant gears turned for the first time in years. The latch went up. The door flew open. Inside! Now! The major dove through the gap, Blake hot on his heels. Together they threw themselves against the door with all their might, slamming it shut just as the flames from the blast rushed him. A moment's hesitation, and they would have been turned to ashes. Blake wiped his brow on his sleeve, smiling as he looked at the major slumped on the ground next to him. They were both exhausted, panting like dogs and sweating profusely. I do hate it when I'm right. I'd say we've softened them up somewhat. Ironside, Seth, Patton, and Martin Gorge, leading general of the Republic Air Corps, were sitting around a table in an army base just south of Kulisuk. Patton sipped from his glass of water and threw a small white chip into the middle of the table as he said it. Ante up. I'll say we've softened them, Gorge said, tossing a chip next to Patton's. There's not a single major Danish garrison on the island that we haven't hit. Even when the Royal Air Force put on their pants and began intercepting us, we still hit all the big bases with minimal losses. He took a gulp from his glass and wiped his lips with a cloth napkin situated next to his cards. On top of that, the Brits' intervention left themselves open, giving us even more stuff to blow up unhindered. A general laugh went about the room at the statement. General Gorge was a jovial, level-headed man with a bulky build, small green eyes, and a face constantly being invaded by whiskers, such was the rapid growth of his beard. There were even rumors that he shaved thrice per day in his attempts at keeping it under control. He'd flown the best aircraft the United States Air Force had to offer before immigrating to the Republic, and had been quick to volunteer and put his knowledge at aerial warfare to good use upon taking up the call to arms. Well, with that said, Seth said, I suppose it's time we inform the Chancellor that Operation Cyclone is ready for launch. He turned to Ironside. 2 cards, Horace. The Secretary of War took the cards handed to him and returned 2 new ones from the top of the deck. Speaking of Cyclone, is it true, George, that you're allowing General Trela to lead the ground assault this time? Yes, sir, Patton replied, and I'm raising you too. Ironside raised an eyebrow. The whole campaign? Yep. Highly uncharacteristic of you, Seth added, tossing 2 chips into the middle. You're always the one to take command in the big battles. Patton chuckled and downed the rest of his glass. Well, you see, good old Mikhail and I both wanted to lead Counter-Strike. So to settle our little disagreement, we decided to play a game of Russian roulette with a pop-gun revolver. Whoever won got to lead Counter-Strike, but had to let the other lead the next campaign. He stopped there, this time laughing out loud. The other 2 couldn't help but smile as they realized the turnout of the event. I assume you won then? Ironside asked with a grin. Patton nodded, still laughing. The man still has the bump from where the pellet hit him. At that, all 3 were laughing. That settles that then, Seth managed to get out. Hey, where's Admiral Herc, by the way? He's preparing his forces for the coming engagement, Ironside replied, tossing 2 more chips out. He figured that, regardless of what our next move was, the Navy would be playing a big role. And I'm calling. Sounds like him, said Patton as he laid his cards on the table. 3 of a kind, aces. Then I suppose the fleet will be ready to deploy when the time comes, added Seth, laying his own hand down. Straight. Ironside simply smiled from behind his cards. Oh, I'm fully confident that Battle Fleet Atlantic will be prepared to depart on a moment's notice. Is that what we're calling it now? Seth asked. Sounds cool enough, added Patton. But come now, Horace, play your cards. The War Secretary smiled casually and placed his upturned cards on the table before him. Aw, come on, Seth murmured. You sneaky bastard, chuckled Patton. Ironside stretched out his arm and swept up the chips. That's the name of the game, gentlemen. He had a royal flush. Sir! A young adept came storming into the room where General Blake was reviewing damage reports from the latest bombing run his troops had experienced. With the obliteration of Reykjavik and his previous HQ, Blake now resided in a bunker 6 miles inland, this one surrounded by anti-aircraft weaponry of all sorts. "Report," the general said curtly. "General, our reconnaissance units and intelligence operators have confirmed a massive fleet on its way here, and it's clear that it embarked from Greenland." Blake tossed the reports onto the desk and stood up. "It's a bloody invasion force!" He stormed out the door, motioning for the atom to follow. "How far were they?" "Not more than 150 or so kilometers." Blast. That's not much time, he thought. "Send word out to General Iverson and Admiral Grenion. I want all available forces rerouted to the southwestern parts of the island. We are going to be ready to repel once the enemy arrives." The weather was warming up, albeit the thermometer still read only about 40 degrees Fahrenheit. A convoy of Icelandic freighters was making its way toward Stykkishólmur, laden to the brim with cargo. Though massive crates large enough to hold tanks could be seen lined up across its deck, its design also gave it ability to store large amounts of goods within its hull as well. 3 British destroyers met the convoy and hailed them. The lead vessel of the convoy slowed its engines until it was directly broadside the first destroyer. "Identification number," the warship's captain commanded. The freighter's captain mechanically responded with a series of letters and numbers, the same ones painted onto the ship's frontal hull. "State your cargo. Minerals, ores, and pig iron. Trade route, Southern Arctic West." Southern Arctic West. That meant that these ships were coming from Greenland, or the Republic, or whatever it was called. "We're coming to inspect your cargo. Prepare for boarding." As if on cue, several shapes appeared on the ship's sonar. "Captain, incoming vessels from the west." There was a pause, the men at the sonar listening carefully and reading and rereading the information being displayed on the screen. "Submarines." "Submarines?" the captain responded with alarm. "How far out?" "Less than 2 kilometers, sir." An explosion made half the crew flinch. The captain looked out the viewport. One of the other destroyers had burst into flames, and was now slowly sinking. "What the devil?" he inadvertently shouted. "Incoming projectile, starboard side!" another crewman called. The captain couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Time to impact! 7 seconds, sir! Brace for—" was all the officer had time to say, before the ships erupted in fire and smoke, the ammunition catches thundering as they were ignited. Aboard the lead vessel in the Icelandic convoy, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Dyer nodded to his man at the radio, who promptly set up a signal to all other ships of the fleet. "This is Dyer. We're past the coastal guards. It's time to raise the flags." Stykkishólmur harbor was small and quiet. It had been spared the worst of the Danish invasion, and even the Republic bombing raids had not come within 2 miles of it. Being a small port, neither the Danes nor the British seemed sufficient to dock their warships in its waters until mass construction could be initiated. With the Republic bombings, that idea had been postponed indefinitely. Nevertheless, there was a small number of Danish officers running the docks themselves. They had been not a little dejected at having been assigned such a thankless task. Yet when the bombs began falling, they quickly became most grateful. They were using one of the boat sail shacks as a trafficking station of sorts. It provided a perfect view of the port, so that nothing came in or went out without them noticing. The 2 officers on duty at the time were at a game of Go Fish, when the little red light linked to the long-range scanner that had been mounted on the shack's roof began to buzz. "Looks like something's coming our way," one of them said lazily, sliding his wheeled desk chair over to the device and checking it. "So, what's the hubbub?" asked the other through a yawn. The other looked at the words forming up on the display in puzzlement. "That's odd. It says that a convoy of freighters is coming towards us at full speed." His companion began to stand up, concern written all over his face. "Freighters? Ships that large would never come to Stykkishólmur." He took out a pair of binoculars and looked out toward the sea. "I don't like the sound of it." "Well, they did make it past the British security checkpoint, so I'd think that they're clear." The man at the window shook his head. "I'm not convinced." For several more minutes, the 2 of them continued their tasks. the one reading the information brought in by the scanner, the other peering out at the sea in search of the incoming convoy. "I think I see them now," the lookout said. "And," his companion replied, "it's as you said, a group of freighters coming straight for us." "How many are there?" "1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. He quickly dropped to a whisper as higher numbers rolled off his lips. "By Jove, there are 18 of them." 18? That's absurd. What could 18 fully laden freighters be doing in these unimportant waters? "Hail them and find out." The man at the machine nodded and picked up the headset. "What's the number on the lead vessel?" "A0483 B2475. Freighter A0483 B2475. This is Stick-Scholmer Port. Report to your purpose in these waters." Only static responded. "They're not responding." The other officer looked at him distraught. "They're not slowing down either." "What?" He got up from his post and ran to the window. The ships were still coming in at full speed. They were nearly on top of them. Worst of all, atop each of their bridges, the Republic flag billowed in the wind. "It's an invasion!" the first shouted. "Sound the alarm and raise HQ!" "Too late!" the other replied. "Jump!" The two of them dove through the back window as the shack was knocked off its foundations, the lead cargo ship plowing through its fragile frame like a pile of twigs. All around the port, the other vessels were doing likewise, running themselves aground at full speed, as if trying to get as much of their huge bulks on the shore as possible. The officers looked up in astonishment. The entire port and beyond had been buried beneath thousands of tons of steel. They looked at each other in despair. They didn't need to wait for the bow of the ship closest to them to blow off in a wave of incinerating fire to know that the Republic's invasion had begun.